know that suggesting something might be the best Disney animated sequel is kind of a dubious honor. It's like being the most compassionate Trump supporter. We're grading on a curve here. But, yeah, this was pretty solid. I figured, if I'm going to tick people off with my notions of the politics behind a movie like this, I might as well get that out of the way early. Zootopia 2. Yeah, it's pretty good. I ended up seeing this because, to my surprise, my kiddo did actually want to see it. I had thought my kiddo might have grown out of Disney animated movies, and they haven't, strictly speaking. I think they just watch them differently now. Like, we went to Moana 2 because they wanted to hate watch it and assumed it was terrible. Neither of us had too many assumptions about this one. I had a few. I'll get to those. But I think they mostly just were there for the anime. Like, we came out and the main thing they really wanted to talk about was the animation quality, especially on the faces and all the verbal cues that were worked into the animation. They were particularly impressed with Nick and like the little fine details of the muscle on his muzzle. So like, that's where my kid's head's at. But anyways, so before we can really cover Zootopia 2, I got to talk a little bit about Zootopia 1. Now, I like Zootopia 1. I liked it a lot at the time, and while I still like it, I also recognize a lot more of its flaws than I did at the time it came out. That having been said, Zootopia 1 has a couple of things. Like, what's kind of been at the center of conversation about it since it came out has been the notion that it's predator-prey dynamic kind of being mapped onto racism doesn't really hold up, which is true. That it is, to some degree, by its nature, propaganda. That is also true. That having been said, for me at least, I don't feel either of those fully taint that movie for a couple of reasons. The first is that while the police are sort of elevated, especially in Judy's mind, it doesn't actually paint them especially great. It paints Judy very good, and that is propaganda by association, because you're like, look how good cops can be, which has its own awkward history. But as far as the race analogy goes, like, yeah, it doesn't fully hold up the more you think about it. But at the same time, while I'm not inclined to fully defend it, I will say that when I see that picked apart, it is by adults putting an adult lens on it. And if you're going to have a conversation with the actual target audience of that movie about race and about prejudice, it's not a bad place to start as far as that stuff goes. Is it dumbed down, oversimplified, doesn't fully map? Yes. All true. But I don't think that robs it of any value at all. But ultimately, why I still think it's a good movie is that while it is very heavy in its messaging, to the point that some could probably argue that nearly everything ties into its messaging in some way, I don't disagree. I'm not sure that's a flaw when it's actually trying to say something. I've made the argument before. Sometimes you need to make some points with a sledgehammer to the face. But it created a really fascinating and well thought out world for all of this to happen in. It actually kind of set a bar that made some later Disney films like Onward Pixar technically, but you know what I mean. Onward comes to mind, where there was so little thought that went into how the species living together were these fantasy creatures, how that would actually reshape the world instead of just dropping a whole bunch of fantasy creatures into a world that basically looks like ours. It felt like there was so little thought put into that. And the reason I had that standard was because of Zootopia, because I saw Zootopia and thought they put so much thought into the ways in which these different species would have to be accommodated, everything from size to specific environments that they need to exist in, what accommodations would have to happen. There was a lot of thought put into it, and I think that the strength of that, combined with, I think, really strong characterization, especially of Judy and of Nick, is why that movie still works, despite its flaws. Coming into Zootopia 2, I was nervous, largely on the basis of the trailer, because I saw the trailer and there was this whole thing about how everyone's scared of reptiles, and I just thought, oh no, they're just gonna have a different group that isn't the predators, and they're just gonna do the same thing again. And it's not quite that. There's a couple things that happen. There's a shift in focus that, while yes, there is some racialization along those lines as far as the allegory goes when it comes to the reptiles. But what this is much more about is about class struggle, the way the rich steal from and demonize marginalized people for their own benefit, which I think holds up a lot cleaner than the straight race analogy that we were dealing with the first time. And also, it like the notion of prejudice against Gary DeSnake, who's a great character, by the way. But the prejudice that is held against him feels more like a plot function than the point. Like, the reason people are prejudiced against reptiles and snakes in specific probably came more from the necessity of people need to not be willing to listen to Gary because that justifies the actions that he takes, because he's trying to do what he's doing, because without accomplishing what he's trying to accomplish, no one's going to believe him in terms of what's going on and what has happened to him and his family. So I think the prejudice against reptiles feels a little bit more reverse engineered to allow that to be the case, but it still works for the most part. And it's funny. In terms of I'm going to make a comparison that is only about how I feel about it as a complete product, and in no other way, shape, or form, because I'm about to make the strangest comparison. This kind of made me feel similarly to how I feel about Zack Snyder's Justice League. And what I mean by that is there's a fair number of choices made about the plotting and the core ideas and some of the stuff that happens that I don't think are the best ideas and certainly aren't what I would have done with it. But if that's what you're going to do, if those are the choices you're making, you executed them pretty dang well. Like, my big hang up with a lot of sequels in general, this isn't even just a Disney thing, but a lot of sequels in general, is that there is often this awkwardness that comes from things like bringing back a whole bunch of characters who were, people liked in the first one but have no business being in the second one. They show up anyway. Repeating too many of the same beats, too much recurring, too much recycling of not just like setting and characters, but like just the thing as a whole. And does this bring back a whole bunch of single scene characters who really probably don't need to be here? Yeah. Is this revisiting a lot of the same core themes, even if it's shifting them a little to be more class than race-based? Yeah. Is it forcing a split and a conflict between Nick and Judy so you can have that third act reconciliation again? Yeah. None of these are choices I would have made, but the execution on all of them was good. And it's a reminder for me that oftentimes the things that I don't like or that make me nervous about watching something has a lot more to do with the fact that when those choices are made, they are more often than not executed badly, rather than the choices being innately bad in and of themselves. So like, in terms of the cameos from characters who showed up before, like, do we see Flash, Bellwether, Duke Weaselton, the Godfather Mole? Like, yes, but they all show up in situations where it actually makes sense. It doesn't feel like they crowbarred in an excuse to have them. It feels like, oh, actually, we're going to have this happen. It would make sense for that person to be integrated into this at least a little. And they're also all reasonably short. Nothing felt like really badly drawn out or dragged out just for the sake of trying to repeat the same jokes. Like, there's some callback jokes for sure, but I was so afraid like they're just literally going to bring the same people to do the same jokes, and they really don't. Plus, we do get a whole bunch of new characters and new stuff. Now, I have slightly mixed feelings about the beaver. Not with more with the concept than the execution. Because execution-wise, she is high energy, well-voiced, cute to look at. She has a different dynamic with Judy and Nick than other characters we've seen, so she's a solid addition. At the same time, conceptually, like, she is a conspiracy theorist, and I don't know, I'm just kind of at the point where, on principle, the idea of a good guy or her wild notions are somehow cute or funny. I just don't think that's, you know. And as we exist in a world where too many people are allowed to spew too much nonsense, I don't find conspiracy theorists cute or funny or laughable anymore. But again, I wouldn't have done that, but they executed about as well as they were going to. So that's kind of the consistent thing with this entire movie, really. I guess a little bit of a spoiler to get into one thing that I feel like I do have a little bit more legit criticism on. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's spoiler free that I want to talk about. Not really. They handled this shockingly well, considering that at its core there's a bunch of ideas I don't like. But again, it's a reminder that execution can save a middling idea. So, yeah, it's pretty solid. That's your spoiler warning. Let's talk a little bit more specific. So, we do a twist villain in this again. And they even kind of lampshade the fact that there was a twist villain last time. And there's a couple things I don't super like about that. The first is the lampshading of it isn't cute. That it's, well, here. When you make fun of a thing and then you do it anyway, here's the clip I like to use.
If you know it's bad, why are you doing it?
It's not that twist villains are bad, but twist villains have become a very highly criticized aspect of modern Disney movies. So, yeah, it's a little bit frustrating on that level. And it also doesn't help that I called this guy as a twist. I actually called both twists with this guy, and I called the later twist early. So like this guy shows Pobert, I think is his name. He's part of this family of lynxes, this wealthy family who supposedly founded Zootopia. But he's kind of the outcast a little bit within the family. They don't think as much of him. And so when you first meet him, he's like really chill and relaxed and sort of like, yeah, well, I'm awkward, but hi, how you doing with Judy? And he kind of admires her. And I immediately thought, you're the bad guy. That was my immediate thought. Now, not only that, and like I called that first, that's like a way late twist. But also, as soon as I saw that somebody with a hidden face was helping Gary, like, okay, that's Pobert. Now, I didn't call why Pobert was going to turn out to be the villain. I did call that he was going to be pretty much instantly. He had big Hans from Frozen energy, like big time. So, what I will say is the reason for him being a villain, I do like, especially as it feeds into the classism dynamic that this is leaning a lot more heavily on, which is that, yes, he is a little bit of an outcast within his family of wealthy, powerful people. That doesn't make him empathetic to the plight of marginalized people. It just means he wants to figure out how to get into good graces and actually partake in that power. And yeah, I think that is a solid message. Am I going to go so far as to say that I'm just going to say billionaires because that's let's go the far extreme on this? Am I automatically saying that all billionaires and their family members who are partaking of the wealth are incapable of being good? No, but like being raised like that, in that power, in that opulence, in that wealth, it warps your priorities. Like it just does. So I actually quite like his motivation and how they go about revealing why he's doing what he's doing. I did like that. So while I don't love the fact that he is a twist villain, but it's not a bad twist and it's not a bad reveal. Yeah. I guess much like the first one, it was just much more thought out than I would have expected. And if I'd rewatched the first one before watching this, I might have expected that. But because it was a sequel, my expectations were automatically lowered. You know, what have Disney sequels been like? Ralph Wrecks the Internet is a disaster. Moana 2 is an embarrassment. Frozen 2, like, had some okay ideas, but was very underbaked. And it's just, none of these are very good. Like, I did say this might be the best Disney sequel. The only reason that I'm saying might as opposed to it is Rescuers Down Under exists. Now, if we're talking relative to its own precursor, Rescuers Down Under wins because that is better than the original. I don't think I'm prepared to say that Zootopia 2 is better than its predecessor. But if we're taking that as a factor out of things and just judging them as films unto themselves and comparing them, it might be a little better than Rescuers Down Under. It's between those two, for sure. And then there's a big drop-off. Like, Frozen 2 might be the third best by default just for having some halfway decent ideas, which a lot of the others haven't even had that. But, yeah. I'm glad I saw this, which I didn't think I would come away saying. So yeah. Zootopia 2. You seen it? What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way. Like, share, subscribe. They all help. Don't worry too much about that, though. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can just come on back next time you need a break. And now to shout out my highest supporting patrons. Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Zubin Lutfula, Auntie Kate 808, Mira G, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Oliver B, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Becky Sparks, Ulrich, Loki Eris, Tracy Scrabbit, Pal Barabajoggle, Sir Didymus is my favorite, and starting this month, I'm going to shout out 3 random supporters from the other tiers. So this month, my thanks to Tommy Castronova, Tim Price, and Caramelized Captain. If you want to hear me shout you out, check out the reward tiers on the Patreon. You know, I put them one on each shoulder, they consolidated immediately. So, thanks, guys.